Welcome once again to another episode of A Scotsman Talks To. I'm your host, Calum Lykan, and we have another amazing guest. I say it every week, every guest is amazing, but this one is particularly special. This is a gentleman who personally has helped me throughout my performance career. He's a gentleman I met in Scotland, but he is in fact a Canadian. I know, the world, travellers, international people. But this episode is all about Michael Williams. Michael Williams is a wonderful fellow storyteller, coach, mentor, educator, musician. He's pretty much just does everything. He's one of those guys that's just talented and fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to bring Michael onto the show. I want to introduce you to the guy that's No, I'm not going to put that on his head. That is not fair, making him responsible for me. But ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Williams to A Scotsman Talks To. Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I don't know if I deserve, half of what you said there, but I will take the other half.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep burdening you with the idea that you're responsible for this manic monstrosity.
Well, when it works, I take responsibility for it. When it doesn't, it's not my fault. It's your mother's.
Wonderful. Well, Michael, it's lovely to have you on the show, and thank you for joining me, because I know you're a couple of hours ahead of me. You're out east in Ontario?
Yeah, Hamilton, Ontario.
Hamilton, Ontario.
My
so
hometown.
It's 9 o'clock for you, so I appreciate you joining me.
Oh, it's okay.
Although I know that you've got a wee cheeky glass of wine, so you're pretty much set up for the evening.
Yeah, it's very precariously balanced on the edge of my table here. So, with my luck, by the end of this, it could be all over me. Who knows?
Oh no, it's okay. You'll be in good company then. We've had a few guests that have enjoyed some wine and had some mishaps as we've carried on.
Right.
So, Michael, the first thing I probably should do is let you introduce yourself briefly. I know who you are. The storytelling world knows who you are, but maybe some of the audience doesn't. So please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you.
A little bit about myself. Well, I was born in Hamilton, here in Ontario, and I mean, in a nutshell, I lived more or less half my life, here in Ontario, and half my life in Scotland. So I grew up here on the outskirts of Hamilton, out in what was then, countryside, fields, and forests, and that really had a huge effect on who I am. I feel, that's still very much a part of me. But unfortunately, as so often happens, the fields and forests that I grew up in and played on are gone. They're buried under tarmac and housing estates, and townhouses and so on. So my history, in a sense, is underneath all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and that land was, and still is, my memory of it is still really important to the person that I think I am today. And so I grew up there. I'm the oldest of six. From between oldest and youngest is 10 years. So my mom had us one after another, and she had twins at the end. My brother and sister are twins, and when they started coming in pairs, my mom said it was time to quit. And so she did. So and I was the first to leave home, and I traveled. I went to Europe and traveled around, had some great adventures, came back. Before that, when I left school, I worked underground in the mines. I went to Northern Ontario. Yeah, I went to Northern Ontario, worked at about 3,600 feet underground in a nickel hard rock mine.
Wow.
And what's the interesting thing about that story, which is related to the storytelling, is that when I was leaving high school, all I wanted to be was a writer, a storyteller, but I wanted to write. Mm-hmm. and I wanted a guitar and I wanted a motorcycle. So I and my dad wasn't going to buy me any of those things, so nobody was. So I saved my money up. And I spent $24 on a guitar, which was a lot of money in those days, Calum. I bought it. I bought a guitar, and never got a motorcycle, although I have ridden them. I wanted to go to university, and now you got to understand, my family were very working class, from Hamilton. Back then it was steel town, where Hamilton was known for its steel factories. And that's where my dad wanted me to work, was, get a steady job in the steel company, and they would take care of you for life. And, you get married, buy a little bungalow, and there's your life, And I didn't want that. And so I had to kind of rebel against my dad. And when I told my dad I wanted to go to university, he blew up at me. And he, said, I wouldn't give you one red cent, for that nonsense. So I kind of turned to my teachers thinking, well, they'll support me. My English teacher did, but I needed a particular teacher's reference on my application form to university.
Right. And
when he asked me what I wanted to be, he was a maths teacher, so you can probably guess where this is headed. I told him I just in all innocence, I was 17 at the time, and I said, I want to be a writer. And he just looked at me aghast, It's like I had said, I don't know, I was gonna imagine the most horrible thing you can think of. And he looked at me and he said, you're not going to do that Mickey Mouse nonsense. He said, I'm not giving you a reference, for that. No, he says, you got to pick something practical, So it was like, wow, and in those days, I was young, I was naive, and you certainly didn't talk back to, to teachers, especially not this teacher. So I said, well, like what? And he said, well, you could do maths, you could do economics, maybe psychology, but practical things, So that's what I signed up for. Yeah. And I went to a McMaster here in Hamilton. And I did well, like mark-wise, but I hated it because I was doing what I didn't want to do, Yeah. I liked that. I did actually do a year there in anthropology, and I got the highest mark that they said had ever been recorded in anthropology. I got 98% on my final exam. But anyway, I walked away from. Yeah, I could have been like maybe Indiana Jones, So.
One of my personal dreams.
Yeah, well, it could have been mine. But anyway, I walked away from university. I dropped out. I didn't even finish the year. And I left without telling anybody, and I went to work in the mines.
Right.
And here's the catch. You see, I'm down working in the mines through the wintertime there up in Northern Ontario, where it's just dark all the time. You go down when it's dark, you come out when it's dark. Didn't see the sun for weeks. And one day I'm down at the very bottom of the mine working with all these old timers, been there forever. And one of the old guys takes me aside and he wants to talk to me. And we're in the dark there. You just got your little headlamps on, And he says, Michael, he goes, he said, you don't belong here. And I thought, well, what I'm, okay, I'm not the strongest guy in the world, but I'm pulling my weight. I'm doing my job, And it was hard to hold up those great big machines and stuff, but I did the best I could. And he said, no. He said, no, it's not that. He said, the mine is no place for an imagination. He said, you're wasting your talent down here, And I think that was because I like to tell like stories, I guess. I like to talk all the time, And so he figured that, he said, don't stay down here like the rest of us. He said, I know what it's like. I came here when I was young, too. I thought I was only going to stay maybe a year, a couple of years, make money, Next thing you know, you're here 10 years. And you bought a car, so you owe money. You got car payments. And then you meet a girl and you get married and you got a house. And then you got your rent or mortgage, And next thing you know, he says, you're here like 25 years like me, down in a mine. He said, no. He says, Michael, he says, you should be a writer. You should be up there, he says. And you should be a writer or a journalist, something like that. And I just thought, man, I wish my dad could hear this guy now, And so soon after that, I left and I just started traveling. I worked in other factories, and I came back to Hamilton, worked for a while, earned some money, bought a car. That's kind of the beginning, of my life, where I just thought, no, I got to go on another journey,
Yeah.
But you go ahead and ask me another question.
No, that's, what I love about this, ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when you actually have a storyteller on the show.
I could keep going.
Basically every question is answered as a story, which I love. I briefly remember you telling me segments of that in the past, but you hadn't gone into such detail. I was just loving that, Michael. Thank you.
Okay.
That's actually really nice to know kind of the full story too.
I just need to take, well, that's not even the full story. That's just part one, but I need to take a sip of wine. So you say something and I'll come right back.
You have a wee sip. Well, the way I have I mentioned this to briefly, as I've mentioned to all my guests, I have looked at my life and put my knowledge, and of course, what I really know is storytelling as well. So I thought of a way, how am I going to incorporate that to make this easier for me to interview my guests?
Mhm.
You know, interviewing can be quite an interesting and difficult thing at times, you know, especially when you've got a got a guest who does.
Yeah.
But I actually based it
Well,
on...
you had Jeff Newman on a while back, and he's a magician, so he did tricks, didn't he? He did magic.
Trying to get Jeff actually just messaged me before this, Michael. Trying to get Jeff to shut up is a challenge. I've discovered. No, Jeff
he's a man after my own heart.
He was so much fun. He is so annoyed because he broke 2 records that episode. This is a wee kind of ongoing thing, but I promised you I wouldn't do this to you tonight. He had the longest segment with only one question asked, and he had the longest episode until last episode with Brendan Hunter, the voice actor, who basically demolished both of those. Wow. Jeff set 55 minutes and just under 2 hours. Brendan broke 1 hour 10 or 1 hour 15 minutes and over 2 hours.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's always fun. But no, the questions that I've kind of looked at is I've just taken Joseph Campbell's hero journey and looked at the basic formula. And to me, they make a very nice and simple way of asking questions.
Yeah,
and know the hero journey.
Yeah, they do, and I've used it myself because I would say, you know, when you introduced me as a storyteller, and I am, but I think unlike a lot of other tellers who would identify themselves as performers, like yourself, you know, I see you as a performer, and that's how I would talk about you when talking to others, you know, when they ask me about you. And you're a very good performer. I remember, seeing you many times on the streets, on the high street in Edinburgh, you know, and you were very popular. Yeah, no, you were a very popular tour guide and taking people down the closes and so on. And
you're not making this sound right here.
Well, no, you were very charismatic, and you were much sought after, you know, let's put it that way.
Thank you.
But and I do enjoy going on stage. I won't lie. I do like that part of it. But for most of my career, I would say probably 5% of my time was performing, and 95% of my time was spent working with people to help them tell their stories.
Yeah.
This is a little bit funny, like being on this side and you asking me for my story, because I seldom get asked to do that. Although I am doing more of that now in my writing and some of my telling, and of course I learned my craft in Scotland, as you did, and there we tended, and this is just a generalization, but we tended to tell more folk tales, fairy tales, myths, legends, that sort of thing, and probably less emphasis on the personal stories. That's a generalization. I know it's changing. When I came back to Canada, sorry, yes. And when I came back to Canada, of course, when I told people I was a storyteller, many people assumed that I told personal tales.
Yes.
And I thought, oh gosh, I tell a few, but who'd want to hear them? It's like, I told fairy tales. So I try to mix it up, obviously. So this is a nice opportunity. Here's somebody asking me about my life, and I am spending more time writing it. And I'll give just a shout out to wonderful woman who's been helping me edit my writing and life story. And she's a theater director and a great editor and a very good friend, June Capito. And I think she'll be listening in tonight. So I'll send that little hello out there to June.
Lovely.
But yeah, so she's working on the performance aspect, for me, and giving me that kind of opportunity to perform. And I it's a wonderful thing, and I'm looking forward to spending more time doing that. But if I may, I'll tell you, I'm trying to think of Canadians watching this as well, and one of the things I've really been blessed with, Calum, is good friends like yourself.
Oh, thank you.
All over the place, seriously, and the opportunity. I've had quite an interesting life. meeting folk like yourself, other storytellers, and so on. And when I was living in Hamilton, I'd left the factories. I was getting restless. I knew I needed a change in my life. I'd hitchhiked down to the East Coast a couple times and traveled around a bit. And I had this old car, and it was in November, and it was just that sleety rain, just terrible. It was snowy rain, freezing rain. And I was driving down the highway from my home, and I turned the corner. Anybody from Hamilton will know it used to be Rickman's Corners. I think it's still called that. And it was pretty desolate in those days. It's all built up now, but it was pretty desolate. And I saw a guy standing there hitchhiking. And of course, I'd hitchhiked lots of times. So I saw this guy, and he had a great big, raincoat on, one of those great big long Macs. And I saw a guitar sticking out from under his raincoat. And I thought, oh, right, I got to stop and give this guy a ride. So I stopped, and he gets in, big guy he was. And he gets in, we get his guitar in the back. And he pulls his hood back, and he sticks his great big hand out, and he says, "Hi," he goes, "My name's Stan Rogers." And, even you've been in Canada long enough to know who Stan Rogers is, Now,
Stan Rogers.
I did not know who Stan Rogers. Stan Rogers wasn't a big name. This is like maybe 1970, late 1972.
Right.
So he was just kind of coming, along. But I didn't know the name. So I just said, "Oh, I'm Mike Williams, pleased to meet you." So I said, "So where are you going, Stan?" And he says, "Well, I'm late for a gig at this folk club called Campbell's Coffee House." I said, "Well, I'm not doing anything." I said, I'll get you there. And he was so grateful. It was like, wow, I was going to be late. I didn't realize it was the weather and everything. So I said, "No problem. I'll get you there." And he said, "You must come in as my guest. Have you ever been there before?" I'd never been in one of these coffee houses. So I said, "Sure." So I got to see Stan play that night as his guest, and another singer-songwriter, Doug MacArthur, who's still about, and he became a really good friend of mine. He lives up in Quebec now, Wakefield in Quebec. So I saw the two of them, and I thought, oh, this is pretty cool, coffee house, it was like, and there were like lots of pretty girls there, and we're all sitting around, and everybody seemed really chilled out, I thought, wow, this is better than going to the steel company. So Stan says to me afterwards, he goes, if you like this, he said, you got to move to London, Ontario, because that's where it's happening. The hub of folk music in Canada is there. It's called Snail's Pace. It's like kind of on par with the Riverboat in Toronto, close. Mm-hmm. So I kept that in mind. I said good night, and that was it. Stan gave me his number. He said, if you're ever in London, give me a shout. So 6 months later, in the summer, I thought I'm gonna go to London, Ontario. I'm gonna move there, and I signed up for a course at Fanshawe College. I was going to study to be a child care worker. I wanted to work with adolescents, teenagers.
Okay.
So I signed up, and I go there, and I find my way to this Snail's Pace, this mythical coffee house. And I walk in with my backpack on, and this fella comes up to me. It turns out he's the owner. His name's John Smale. He owns the place. He asked me who I am, and I tell him the whole story about meeting Stan, and, he's nodding his head. And then he says to me, so if you're new in town, I guess you'll need a job, right? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. He says, well, you can work here. I said, really? He says, yeah. He says, well, washing windows, tidying up. We need a dishwasher as well. Can you do that? I said, sure, I'll do anything. So that was the beginning of probably 10 years or so of working at full-time and part-time at Snail's Pace. As I was the dishwasher, I was waiter, wash windows, and occasionally I would introduce the acts when John wanted to go off with some friends to have a beer somewhere, and he would leave me in charge and say, you introduce the people, So I got to meet a lot of musicians and made a lot of good friends. So and of course Stan died very sadly in 1983, I think it was, in a plane fire in the States. So it was a great loss, and we never, I can't say that we became really good friends, but he was a really good acquaintance. And he was the one where he was responsible. Talk about the hero's journey. He was like the equivalent of one of those mentors that you meet along the road, who changed the direction of my life at that time. It really was. If I hadn't met Stan, I would not have gone to London, Ontario, and then, got into music and made all those other, musical friends from all over Canada. And the US as well. And many of them are still friends of mine today. I still keep in touch with many of them. And sadly, some of my very good friends have passed on. Two of them, one people may know, was the singer-songwriter Willie P. Bennett. And Willie came into the kitchen one day and he was looking for a place. He didn't have a place to live, and he'd broken up with one of his girlfriends. And I turned around, and I happened to have a 2-bedroom apartment, and my roommate had left. So I just turned around. I didn't really know Willie. I just said, "Hey, I got a room at my place. You can, there." So Willie and I were roommates and became very good friends for years. And in fact, I saw him. He died in 2008, and he came to Scotland several times actually to see me. And we were very good friends right to the end. So, and the other friend was Ken Palmer, who played with a bluegrass band. He was the mandolin player. And Ken and I were roommates for many years as well. So very, very dear friends. And it was a very special time in my life, Calum,
Yeah.
A really treasured time. It was unique to that time period. And then it kind of, and then things change, video killed the radio star, whatever it was called, live music kind of, it comes and goes, and
of course.
we move on to other things.
You've kind of actually broached upon how I like to start my questions, because you've almost kind of started your origin story there. Obviously, I always say, because, most people are watching Marvel movies and that, and they think the origin story is a whole brand new thing from comic books, but it's been around forever. So you've kind of started your origin story. And I knew that you were first a musician. I always remember you telling me those stories about the bands and how you did things. Can you tell us how did it progress from there? How did you go from musician, which you still are, I know, and really kind of move into all the other avenues? And if we say, your performance and storytelling, how did that evolve?
Yeah. So what happened when I was in London, Ontario, and obviously I'm meeting, I'm surrounded by musicians, live music, and singer-songwriters, men and women writing their own stuff, and that really intrigued me. And there were all kinds of combinations. There were bluegrass bands, there were rock bands, jazz bands. I mean, there was everything. And I got involved in the bluegrass side of it and started helping out at the festivals, the bluegrass festivals. Yeah. And then eventually, I had a guitar and I got into playing, and I started playing with folk and or sitting in, and I had a really good time. And then I guess around 1979, I met some guys and went out and auditioned and got a job in a bluegrass band called the New County Line. And for the next several years, we played all over, Southern Ontario. But I was they made me the lead singer. I was the front man. And it's not a job I would have chosen for myself, because they were all great musicians. And to be put out, thrust out in front, And I'm, it might be hard to believe, but I actually naturally am an introvert. I really am. And so it wasn't the most comfortable place for me, but there was something about being behind a microphone. And I don't know, maybe Calum, as a performer, you'll understand this. People would assume that because you were front and center, that you must be really extroverted and, you can hobnob with everybody and mingle and all that. I found that very difficult. But behind the microphone, I felt protected. I felt like that was my own little space. And I know it's funny, but there could be like 4 people in front of me, 400 or 4,000 people. But I just felt like I was in my own little cocoon, and I would just sing these songs, but I wasn't always like, I knew people were there, but it was like, as long as I had that microphone in front of me. Now there were I don't know. It's a strange thing. And of course I had the band behind me, all kind of supporting me, which was great. So, but I think eventually over time, it helped build up my confidence I had to say things. I had to talk to the audience. I wasn't always the funniest guy, but I had to do it. It was like, if you didn't do it, then the band, you kind of let the band down, But there were times during the breaks, I would disappear. I would go to if we had a room, I'd go to the hotel room, or I'd go outside and sit in the van or something. And I know, fortunately for me, my band members were very outgoing. They love to drink, they love to mingle, talk to the women and stuff like that. And I'd be sitting in the van, and they'd be like, people would say, because the guys would tell me, they go, they think, what's wrong with Michael? Is he like really stuck up? He doesn't like us. He's very antisocial. But I was very fortunate that all the guys I worked with, they understood, and they were very supportive, and they protected me. And I'm not saying I did that all the time. There were many times I learned to sit and get pissed with people, but after a while, when you've done it night after night after night, you get tired of it,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And people are buying you beers, and you got like 17 beers, in front of you, and they're all expecting you to drink them, because they bought them for you.
Sounds like a Scotsman's dream.
Yeah, I know. It was more my nightmare. But, and also, during that time, yeah, I probably drank did drink a lot more in those days. And that got to me too. And eventually, that band came to an end. We made a record, and then it kind of came to an end, and people go their different ways. Mm-hmm. And I was working in a record store called Sam the Record Man, which was a big chain across Canada. It's gone now, I think. Okay. And I just realized, like, even that is not a dream job. It's like, I used to think working at a record store would be like, wow. I met what's his name, Brian. Guy, the summer of '69. Who's that guy? Brian Adams. Brian Adams. I met Brian Adams, and you'd meet people, like they'd come in and do stuff in the store, in-store promotions and stuff. But Calum, I got to the point where I thought, this is a dead end road, for me right now. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and anyway, long story short, decided to get married. Got married. My wife was pregnant with our first child. And I decided finally, after 13 years, to go back to university and become the writer or study literature. I become the thing I always wanted to be finally,
Excellent.
So I did. And I loved it. I'll tell you, I was 30 years old. That's the time to go back to university. I'll tell you that right now.
Oh,
I was surrounded by 18-year-olds who knew nothing about the world, and it's like every time the professor asked, my hand would go up. Now when I was in public school and high school, every time I did that, I got ridiculed. I got put down by the other kids, or the teacher getting tired of me putting my hand up all the time. So, but at university, oh man, no, it's like, I know that, I can engage in intelligent conversation with my professor. I loved it, Calum. I just loved it.
Oh, wonderful.
I studied, Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, Shakespeare. I mean, I took everything I could get my kind of hands on. I took every course I could. I studied medieval music, art. I did art. I studied with, two really good Canadian artists. And in fact, at one point thought I might become an artist, but anyway, I did really well at literature, and everyone said, my advisors at the time said, you need to, I did my BA and I did really well. And they said, oh, you got to do a master's, So I did my master's and got it published. And they said, oh man, you got to do a PhD. And I never thought of, this wasn't my plan. I had no plan, absolutely no plan. And now I got 2 kids,
Yeah.
And I'm working at night in a bakery, like a Dempster's, a big, industrial kind of bakery. So I'm doing that at night from 11 till 7 in the morning. And then I went to my classes. And then I come home exhausted and sleep. And I usually slept in my classes, but I had a little tape recorder, and I would get the tape recorder going. I'd fall asleep in the front row of the lecture theater, and then, but I'd have the recording of it. Somebody would wake me up. So, but yeah, so I got into the academic thing, and I thought, wow, I'm good at this. It's like everybody, And then when I got a big scholarship, which I could go anywhere, and I applied to Edinburgh, Oxford, and London. And I got accepted at all 3. And I'd been to Oxford once before when I was traveling. I've been to London actually as well. But I had a wife now and 2 kids. And I thought, where is the best place? And I on one of my trips, I'd spent 1 day in Edinburgh. And it was a beautiful day, Calum. Blue sky, sunny. It was August.
And
It was a
that's the catch with Edinburgh. It has one nice day a year
Yeah.
for everyone.
That was the day I was there, and that's what I remembered. So I thought, Edinburgh, I'm going to Scotland, and that's where we went. And I never looked back. And that was over 30 years ago. And I only went intending to do my PhD. And I never dreamed that I would be there for 30 years. But it became my home, and I still consider it my home, like my soul home. You know, Canada's where I grew up, and it's where I was born, and my brothers and sister are here, and other relatives. But Scotland is I knew it from when I got there. I just felt like I'd never been there before. I don't have relatives. You know, my background is Irish and English, Southern England. I know, yeah. We all have a cross to bear. But I have the wild Irish side, you know, so.
Yeah. Oh, that's acceptable.
Yeah. So Scotland was kind of like a safe place to be, you know. And I was really being groomed for an academic life. And I was only in at Edinburgh for a couple of months when, again, as luck would have it, talk about another, you know, change in life. The lecturer, I was in the Department of Canadian Studies. And I was in the Department of English, both places. So the lecturer in Canadian Studies, she was away at Christmas. I got there in October. So in December, she was on a holiday in the Alps somewhere. She broke her leg skiing. So the director of the center, old crusty Cambridge historian, Jed Martin, and Jed comes to me and says, Michael, can you teach? Now, you have to remember, you know, by that time, I'm like 34 or something like that. So I'm kind of like, I look like a regular man, you know.
Yeah.
Mature person, you know.
You look like you might be able to adult.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. So I just, of course, I'd never taught in my life, but I just said, yes, you know. And Jed goes, great, you start Monday. And it was undergraduate classes, you know, first, second, and third year. So I did. I did. I just swatted up and figured, you know, as long as I could stay a chapter ahead of them or whatever. And I did. And I started teaching. And that went on for like, that was to go on for about 7-8 years. And then a couple of weeks after that happened, Jed's pal in the English department, Colin Nicholson, he says, I hear you're teaching over in Canadian Studies. I didn't know you could teach. And I said, oh, yeah. He said, well, would you teach here in the English department? I said, sure thing. You know, because I needed money. You know, I didn't have a job or anything. I had a scholarship, but the foreign tuition fees kind of ate up quite a bit of the scholarship.
Yeah.
And my wife wasn't working at the time. So, and she was pregnant. That was the other thing. She was pregnant with our third child. So I just said yes to Colin. I said, yeah, I'll start teaching. And what do you want me to teach? And it was like American literature and the introductory course for the first years and stuff. So again, I just brushed up really quick, and it was a dream job. I just thought, this is my dream. This is what I love. You know, it's like I'm now immersed in the world of stories. Yeah. That was the whole thing. You know, it's like I'm not just traveling around listening to other people sing their stories or tell them, but now it's like I'm in like the world of literature, the world of narrative and myths and understanding how narrative works, you know. And my PhD I was very interested in how people, about autobiography, how people write the self, you know.
Yeah.
And, yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I did that, and I taught, and occasionally I gave lectures. I gave a series of lectures on Robert Burns once in a big theater, which that was exciting.
My hometown.
Yeah. So gradually I just became more and more in love with Scotland and being there. And I had wonderful friends from all over the world, you know, because Edinburgh is very cosmopolitan.
Oh, yeah.
University attracts a lot of people from all over, and performers too, because of the Fringe and Edinburgh Festival and so on, and theater. And but anyway, 1995 comes around, and we were renting, and we wanted to buy a house, and the place that we were renting was a cottage out in the Pentland Hills. Okay. Kind of old farm cottage, you know. Nice. And the owners said to us one day they needed some cash, and they said, would you be interested in buying the place? And they gave us a really good deal. But so I said, yeah, but I was working on one of these rolling contracts where they hire you for the whole year, but not the summer. You know, your contract goes from like, I don't know, October till the following June or something like that.
Right.
So right around the same time, I get another teacher leaves the school that my kids are at, which was the Edinburgh Rudolf Steiner School.
Oh, yeah.
You might know that school, yeah.
Yeah.
In Edinburgh. And I knew a little bit about the school. My wife knew a lot more about it. My kids were there, largely because, you know, my wife was very interested in it, and I was curious about it. And I knew that they really championed storytelling, that they really encouraged the teachers to use story as a way of teaching. So that really appealed to me. And also so a teacher left there, an English teacher, and they weren't coming back. So they asked me if I could come and help out a couple of afternoons. So I did. Yeah. I went 6 months. I just went there on my own time. And I taught a high school class. And at the end of that 6 months, they said, well, that teacher's not coming back. Would you consider staying here? Because, you know, the kids love you, and it's, you know, and I was enjoying it. It was a lot less money than what I was making in the thing, but it was a steady job. It was like a for real full-time job. So, and we wanted to buy the house. So it was a way of doing that. So I gave up the prestigious academic career that I was kind of being groomed for. Actually turned down kind of an offering at Nottingham University. Didn't want to go there.
No.
Yeah. Have you seen Nottingham?
It's got its nice bits.
Yeah. Sorry. No offense to anybody from Nottingham, but at the time, it just wasn't for me. It wasn't the place for me. I mean, Robin Hood thought it was okay, you know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well,
but
he had issues.
Them all. That's why it's so poor. You know, probably.
Yeah, right.
This is run down. He took all the money and disappeared.
Well, that must have been it. Yeah. So I stayed in I wanted to stay in Edinburgh. I loved Edinburgh, and I took the job at the Steiner School and worked there for the next 10 years as the principal teacher of English. And they gave me a lot of freedom. I got to kind of set everything up the way I wanted, and I got to teach. They basically said, teach what you feel like you need to teach. And I made a point of learning what I could about Steiner's approach to education. And but I mixed it, you know, I had my own background in education. So I brought a lot of that. I wanted to bring some kind of intellectual rigor, but at the same time, you know, the creativity and the imagination were really important. And the storytelling. So I had the whole school from like the really wee pre-kindy kids right up to the end of high school. And once the teachers knew that I loved, you know, telling stories, I would get invited to all the different classes so I could practice on all the different ages. So yeah, 10 years there. Let me take another sip of wine. Give everybody a chance to kind of go to the bathroom.
No, I'm loving this. This is all stuff I didn't know. I kind of liked what you were saying, going back to even your kind of the introvert side of things. And I think from chatting to many performers, oddly enough, it's a thing that comes up a lot. You know, a lot of us are what we kind of call extra introverts. You know, we're very out there, but then we have to go and hide afterwards.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, what I didn't say too, and I don't know if this is, I know a lot of performers kind of feel this. I used to have really highs and lows. You know, I've been plagued, not so much now, but I was diagnosed with depression when I was about 19, and did the whole thing with drugs like antidepressants and all that kind of stuff, off and on over the years. And I went into therapy. I love therapy. I just loved it. In fact, I kept going even when the therapist said I didn't need to keep coming. Because it was like a whole inner journey. It was like the Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, you know?
Yeah.
And I learned so much from the one therapist in particular. But I always like to have a therapist or a mentor. Even to this day, I mentioned June earlier. I mean, I see her as one of my mentors right now. She knows stuff about performing from her theater background that I don't know. I've worked with people like David Campbell. You know, David and we co-mentored one another for a year. Michael Margolis, American storyteller. Doug Lippman, another American storyteller. I worked with Doug for 3 years. Oh, wow. So I've always had a mentor, you know, and I still do. I think that's very important for anybody in the performing business, is to have someone who's willing, who can challenge you. and really listen. Listen openly without judging you, and allows you to make mistakes or say stupid things, and then try to figure out, what am I doing here? What's going on?
Yeah.
That's really important. And I've worked with a couple of really wonderful women too. Lisa Bloom from Israel. I met her when I was out there. And Tanya Taylor Rubenstein, a great, story coach, another theater person she was living in Santa Fe. She lives in Nashville now. These are wonderful, wonderful people. I've really been blessed with meeting people like that, and who've been very, very helpful. And of course, Calum, the two storytellers that again really kind of altered the course of my life. And around 1999, I think it was, 97 was when I discovered the Scottish Storytelling Centre on the High Street in Edinburgh.
Yes.
The Netherbow, it was called then.
Wonderful place.
Yeah. And Donald Smith, of course, and I met David Campbell. And I spent the sort of 7 years like one of the old-fashioned apprenticeships. I took every workshop I could afford. Every time there was a workshop or a talk, I would go. And I met two really, they were my muses, Ruth Kirkpatrick and Claire McNichol.
Lovely. Yeah.
And they were social workers. So you see, I had been a social worker at one time. I'd been a counselor working with teenagers back in the 70s. So when Ruth and Claire, knew that and knew I was interested in storytelling, they started inviting me to come with them to the, either schools or the residential centers, like for teenagers, these places. Similar to what I had worked in the 70s. Yeah. So I started going with them, and I got to tell stories to teenagers and slightly younger kids. And they were so good at taking me out and taking a chance. So eventually the organization that they work for, was it Children First or Children in Scotland? I ended up working for both of them. But the organization started asking me, because there weren't a lot of guys at that time telling stories. There were a few. Yeah. This is around the year 2000. And so the organizations, they started asking me to go out on my own. So that was when I got my chance to just go out on my own and do kind of, like what I learned from Ruth and Claire, really. And what I had learned myself as a teacher and as a counselor before that. So I had those skills, to put into practice, along with my new passion for storytelling. And then in 2000, almost 2001, I was doing another degree at that time. I did this degree in local history from Oxford. This advanced diploma type of thing. And I really enjoyed it. I was teaching, I was doing the storytelling. It was just like life was really full. And then I one day at school, I collapsed. I just fell down. I literally fell down. A cup of coffee in my hand. It came out of the kitchen, and I collapsed. And you know who was right there? Who he didn't catch the cup of coffee, but he caught me. Peter Snow. Because Peter Snow was my colleague. Yeah, Peter Snow, great storyteller who sadly passed away not long ago. And Peter was a dear friend of mine, and we were colleagues. We were both English teachers, although Peter concentrated a lot more on the drama and me on the literature part. And Peter caught me and took me to he lived nearby the school, and he took me home, put me on the couch, said, "I'll come back with you." And something was wrong. I didn't know what it was. But by the time Peter came back, I was tired, but I felt okay and well enough to go home. But something was not right, Calum. I'm not saying that I was physically not unwell, but something had broken inside, like something wasn't right. And I this will sound kind of weird, but it was like I heard this voice inside me, or felt it, or however you want to put it. And that voice was telling me that it was time for me to leave teaching and to follow the storytelling path. And this was like, no. Like, no, that you must got that wrong. It's like, I'm really enjoying teaching. Everybody loves me here. The kids love me. The parents love me. My colleagues, no. I'll just stay a teacher, and I can do storytelling every now and again. Right. Yeah. And the voice, it wouldn't go away. It just haunted me. 2000, 2001, I went down south to a clinic. They treated me for, I got treated for addiction. And you know, I had to go, see a psychotherapist every day, and I was there for a couple of months the first time, and 3 months the first time, and I think 2 months the second time I went. And they basically treated me like they would treat any addict, because I had the same symptoms as an addict. It was like I was on a kind of high, and I was a perfectionist, Calum.
Mm-hmm.
I had to be the perfect teacher, the perfect at everything. It wasn't enough to be just okay.
Yeah.
And I would work really long hours, and it took a toll. I know it took a toll on my family, my kids. But I'd be up till like 2 a.m, perfecting the perfect lesson plan, Everything I had to do had to be just like right.
Yeah.
And there was such a fear. I was so afraid that if I didn't, that I would lose everything. Like that, that nobody would love me. That nobody, it's a typical addict story. It's like you're trying to fill a big hole in yourself, this dark black hole that's unfillable, really. And you can fill it with drugs. You can fill it with alcohol. You can fill it with sex. You can fill it. You can fill it with work. You can fill it with this drive to be perfect. But no matter how much you try to fill it with whatever, it's not enough. It's never enough. And you always feel like you're an imposter. You feel like you're going to fail, that somebody's going to come up to you and tap you on the shoulder and say, you're a fraud, and you live in fear all the time of that, So I went to this place, and it was very, very good, very, very helpful. And the voice was there. Nobody said, nobody forced me to kind of be like, well, you got to listen to that voice, I mean, I knew. So, but it took me another 3-4 years, 2005 anyway.
Yeah. And
by 2005, I knew. I thought, it wouldn't go away. It just persisted. So I thought, okay, I just absolutely love teaching. I love it, but I'm going to leave it. And I did. I handed in my resignation. Nobody could believe it. Everybody said, why? Like, you got the perfect job. And there's the word perfect again, eh? You got the perfect job. Who did understand? My colleagues didn't understand it. My wife was really struggling to understand what I was doing. A lot of my friends didn't quite get it, but who did get it? Were my pupils, were the kids. Those young people who I told you could do anything in the world. And then when they found out that what I really wanted to do was storytelling, they were kind of like, well, why aren't you doing it? We don't think you have to be a teacher forever, And I remember one day when I told them that, and they told me that in class, and I thought, wow, it's like, how could I not been listening to myself? I'm telling them, and I'm not taking my own advice, Yeah. So I handed my resignation in. I announced to everybody. 2005, I finished in June. That was the end of it. And then, Calum, I didn't have a clue. I didn't really have a clue as to exactly what I was going to do. How do you become a full-time storyteller? Like, where are you going to make your mortgage payment, And my wife was working. My wife had a practice. She's a psychotherapist, and she had set up a practice. But still, she was struggling to get it going, She was doing okay. We weren't on poverty's door or anything like that, but it needed me to be working.
Yeah.
And for 2 years, whenever anybody asked me what I did, I said, I'm a teacher. But I wasn't, because it was the thing that was acceptable. People understood, oh, you're a teacher. Oh, that's cool. Except I didn't teach. And anyway, in the meantime, there were two things. I went to a little local folk festival in our out in the Pentlands there, and I met some guys. I met the guy Dave Gray and some other guys. And anyway, long story short, they invited me to join a band. We put a band together, and we played for years. Very eclectic we were, like Talking Heads meets Johnny Cash meets Yoko Ono. I don't know. It was yeah. And we had a piper. We had Stevie Connor. He was a great piper. He joined the band for a while. We had a trumpet player. We did ska and rock and roll. I did some singer-songwriter stuff. And we became really, really good friends. That was really my outlet. I made a little bit of money, not much, not very much money. We made some CDs and stuff, enjoyed that. But, and I did a little bit of storytelling, and I was also training with a guy named David Keith down in Dumfries, who was a peace educator. And he had this really wonderful educational organization called Unipaz, which was had a global affiliation, its headquarters in Brazil. And it was a peace organization, education organization working with kids and young people and adults around conflict resolution, that kind of stuff. So I trained with David and got accredited with the organization, and I started working with him I kind of moved down to Dumfries. For a while I traveled back and forth on the 702. And the 702, up and down. Oh, what a road. But we worked in schools. We worked in all the schools down, a lot of schools in and around Dumfries and Galloway. And got to know Burns country very well down there. Yep. And we taught conflict resolution, simple meditation skills, how to get along with the kids in your class, worked with the teachers, the parents. It was great. The program won an award and everything, and we had a wonderful time. And then the funding ran out. So, I was making some money, doing okay. And then the funding ran out from the local council. Yeah. Times were hard, cutbacks and so on. So that was one of the programs that got cut back. But I came back, back to Edinburgh, still playing. Anyway, then I just realized there's some parts I probably don't want to tell. Well, anyway,
you leave out, you edit whatever you need to.
Yeah. Well, again, long story short, things kind of went pear-shaped with my marriage, as often do with people. Mm-hmm. I certainly take my share of the blame. I know people say it takes two, to succeed or fail. Yeah. But I certainly, I'll even take, the majority of the blame. We tried the marriage counseling and stuff. Anyway, it was a very, very disruptive time. And if that would have been, on your hero's journey, that was my belly of the whale. That was my dark night of the soul time. Yeah. I left, and I had nowhere to go. I had a friend who had sold his flat in Edinburgh, but the new owners didn't take it for a month, so it was sitting empty for a month. And he had moved to Switzerland. So he told me, he said, the key's under the mat. So I went into this empty flat, and there was just a mattress left on the floor of one of the rooms. So that's where there were no blankets, there were nothing. I just slept on that mattress, and and lived there until I could kind of begin to sort myself out and find a place and all of that. But it was like everything for me was flipped upside down. Everything. I had a wonderful life. I had a social life in this town, this little hamlet that I lived in the Pentlands, and everything was gone. Like everything. I'm in Edinburgh. I don't really know a lot of people in Edinburgh, and it was just a terrible time. I don't need to go on all the detail, but it was horrible. And eventually, I found my way out to East Lothian, to Preston Pans. Okay. I just wanted to get away from everything. I had to start kind of over again. And I went to Preston Pans, and Preston Pans, an old coal mining town that's all dried up, and fishing's dried up, and poor but really good people. I'll tell you, real salt of the earth people. They were very, very good to me. And that's where I met Tim Porteous, another storyteller. He lived out there.
The wonderful Tim.
Yeah, and Tim was a godsend. I found an apartment, a little apartment out there I shared with this other guy, and I got myself kind of settled, and I kept to myself. I didn't do very much. I didn't socialize. I'd see Tim, now and again. And I'd go for walks. Every day I'd walk along the ocean, up to Cockenzie and sometimes to Long Nidri. Along the Firth there. And every day I did that, back and forth, and I'd stop off at a little cafe there and have a cup of coffee and a fried egg sandwich. And they never cooked the eggs long enough there. Every time, you think I'd learn. every time I'd bite into a fried egg sandwich, it would burst, you know.
But
And
that's how it should be.
I'd have yolk
It's
all
the
down the front of me.
explosive egg.
Yeah, it was explosive eggs. Yeah. But anyway, that's beside the point. But I'll tell you how wonderful, how accepting Preston Pans is. So one day I get up in the pans, and I'm unshaven. I looked a mess, and I wasn't drinking or anything, but my hair was all kind of wild, and I had this really grizzly beard. I had old sweatpants. So I just pulled on some old sweatpants, and I wanted to walk down to the co-op and like, you know, get a coffee. It was a Sunday morning. So I walk down there and I get a coffee because Greg's wasn't open yet. And I get a coffee and I'm standing outside and I'm leaning on one of those concrete bollards, you know, and I'm just standing there sipping my coffee, and an old fella walks by and he stops and he looks at me and he goes, man, he goes, I know how you feel. He goes, if I had the money, I'd buy you a half a whiskey. I thought, oh my God, he thinks I'm hungover. You know, it's like I'm also drunk on the street, you know. And yet he was so compassionate, you know, and it was like, he wasn't judging me. It was like he'd been there at one time, you know, and he'd seen it before, and he had just complete compassion for me. And I just started to cry. And I just thought, oh, I love this place, you know, and this is home, you know. It's like we're strangers, just love you, you know, even though you look the worst you could be.
Yeah.
So, and that sums Tim up, you know, and Tim really took me in. I joined the local, they had a little theater group. We used to put on plays at the Gothenburg there.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And I got to put on my best Scottish accent, you know, and be in these Robbie Burns plays with Tim and all the other locals, you know. Mm-hmm. But they accepted me. They never made fun of me. They just completely welcomed me, you know. And I'll never forget that, you know. And in fact, one day, you know, and Tim's been through some hard times too. And one day Tim was going over to Sweden because he has a daughter with an ex-partner who lives there. And he asked me if I would watch his house at the time, you know, where he lived there on his own. And I said, yeah. And he gave me the key. And when Tim got back, you know, a week later or whatever, I'd been out to the house and watched it. And I went to give him his key back. And he said, no, he says, you keep it. He said, if you ever need a place, he says, you don't even have to ask. Just go there. You have the key. Treat it as it's your own house. You know, if you ever need it. And I was like, wow, really? Okay. And anyway, I still have the key, you know, it's in my wallet. And when I was talking to Tim the other night, you know, he messaged me on video, and I said, you know, Tim, I said, I still have your key to your house. And he goes, oh, that's lovely. He goes, and then he kind of smiled. I said, what is it? He goes, well, I've changed the lock since I gave you that key years ago. But he said, you know, just let me know if you want a new key. I said, no. I said, Tim, look, he said, I'll just keep this key because it's more a symbol that you were willing, you know, that you gave me the key to your house. That's the people of the Pans, you know, Preston Pans. That's the kind of people they are. In fact, honestly, in the 30 years, you know, I met the odd jerk, but, you know, that's what Scotland means to me. You know, I love Canada. I know there's lots of wonderful people in Canada. But right from the very beginning, from the moment I arrived in Scotland for 30 years, that's what people are like there, you know. And I miss that at times. I have my very dear friends, and I love them. And I really do. I love them all. You know, and I just think of all their names. But if I start trying to name them, I know I'll miss somebody, and then somebody will feel, because Scots, they'll feel bad if I left their names out, you know.
Yeah, but we get grumpy if we're not acknowledged.
Oh, they get grumpy. But, you know, if anybody's listening to this, or you're listening to it later in the recording, you know, and I just, you know, I love you guys very much. I really do. You're just the best people. And I'm going to start crying now. So I got to have another sip of wine.
Homesick.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
That's the whole Scottish
Michael,
thing.
You've managed to actually cover about 4 of my questions in one.
4?
You've covered
wow.
mentors, you've covered trials and tribulations, you've covered your journey, which is not unexpected, to be honest, when we get talking. So I'm quite delighted with that. So a couple of questions have come in from audience members.
Really? Oh, okay.
early on, and I don't know if you acknowledged this one, someone was asking, as you write, are you writing stories now or more biography? So
More like a memoir, like
memoir.
autobiographical. So at the moment, I'm working through my childhood, which was, I didn't say a lot about it, but yeah, I'm working through stories of my childhood right now. And I want to do, I'm doing a collection of those. And in fact, I thought, if we had time and things were getting slow, I'd read you an extract from the story that was published just to give you a taste of that. But yeah, so and then I'll probably, then my next little bout of stories will probably be about adolescents. And eventually, I mean, a lot of these stories I've shared with you, partly it's important to tell them because I'm getting older, and so I'm afraid, obviously, of forgetting them. There's something, God forbids, but if something like dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever might ever prevent me from remembering these stories. So that's what the impetus behind writing them down. It's kind of like your legacy, and I'm always saying to older people, I said, wow, write them down, or if you've got older parents or grandparents, like record their stories, ask them questions. One day my oldest son, Luke, said to me, Dad, he said, you tell a lot of stories. When I was teaching, he'd say, you tell, the kids that you teach, they're always telling me like the stories you tell them. He said, but you haven't told us all the stories. And I was like, yeah, wow, he's right. I guess I didn't think you were really interested, So part of it is I'm telling these stories and I'm beginning to write them down because I want to pass them on. I want to leave them for my kids and my grandkids. Our stories, I believe, like, our stories are like really the final gift that we leave our loved ones. And was it the African-American poet Maya Angelou? I often quote her, this quote. She said, the greatest agony is to bear an untold story. And the joke about the man who he's got a big case going into court, and his lawyer says, no, look, he says, you stay here, I'll do all the talking, I can win this case. Might jeopardize it if you go in, they'll get you, you'll get all emotional and so on. So the lawyer goes in, and the lawyer wins the case, but the fella is upset. And he says, why? I won the case for you. He says, yeah, but I didn't get a chance to tell my story.
Yeah. And
I, over the years, I've encountered that so many times, working with kids, with young people, with elders, with seniors. People want to be acknowledged. We all want to be acknowledged, don't we? That's what storytelling is about. When you tell stories, I remember once working in a school in Edinburgh, and the teacher wanted to learn storytelling, but she was really nervous. What she loved was the reading hour, like when they had a stand that they put a book on, a picture book. Yeah. And the kids would all, she'd get them all to look at the picture book, and then she would tell them the story. She'd read them the story. And I was teaching her to tell the story, put the book away and just tell the story to the kids. So she said, well, okay, so we worked through a story. And when it came time, she was nervous, but she did it. She told this story, and she was great. It was really good. But at the end, she was so nervous. She said, she goes, wouldn't you rather me, read you the story again? And the kids, unanimous, all at once, they just said, no. And then she said, well, why? And a little girl put up her hand and she said, because when you were telling that story and you were telling that part about the princess, you looked right at me. And she goes, oh, I felt really special. I felt like I was the princess. And then a boy said something similar, oh, you looked at me, when this part, and that was it. It's that, what, the travelers say in Scotland, a story is told eye to eye, mind to mind, and heart to heart. Yeah. And that's it. That, to me, it's as simple as that. There's nothing more complicated about storytelling. And it's what I really miss right now. I'm with this pandemic. I miss that so much. I can't even tell you how much I miss it. It hurts. It's like, to be in the physical presence, to feel the presence of other bodies in the room, and to hear they're moving about, and the noises that they make, and the sounds and the breathing, and then you feel like you're breathing with them, and then when you tell the story, it's like you're giving kind of birth to it, and it's like they're like the midwives. They're like inviting it out of you, and and it's like this space to me, which is like almost like a sacred space.
Yeah.
That the two of you, the both of you, you make it together, and I miss that really dearly, and I'm really looking forward to when I can do that again, to be in the presence of people, whether it's me listening to their stories or they listening to mine.
Yeah.
I
didn't think I was missing it as much as I was until you started.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
like Zoom, like what we're doing, it's we're very fortunate to have this technology that we can do this, because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do it. We would just have to accept the loss.
Yeah.
But it has its pitfalls, we're only seeing each other from, like our first buttons up,
Yeah.
And a lot of the body language is lost, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And we depend on that. We that becomes very much part of the story. And even
it's
our
the reading
voices.
the audience. It's the gauging the feel of the room. It's the kind of seeing those little nuances in a body, like, oh, I'm maybe losing them, so I need to,
Yeah. It's right. Like listening is so important part of storytelling. And when I do workshops, I usually start with listening, silence first, and listening, because a storyteller, when you're on stage, you have to listen, not just you listen to the audience. You're always aware, like listening, what's going on in the room, and do I need to pay attention to that? Maybe that will feed into something I'm doing here, So it's a real give and take, a real dynamic. So you're listening to the room. You're listening to what's going on inside you as well. Is something, have I just triggered something in me? Am I getting emotional, or, I'm feeling a real joy, a real humor coming on here, and you have to listen also to the story, that is, to the characters that you are portraying. It's like, what does the giant really want to say at this moment, given everything else I'm listening to, And I know that, saying it like that makes it sound complicated, but over time, it becomes just second nature. It's what you do, but it's very important to draw attention to those things when you're working with somebody who's just starting out. And that was a big part of my storytelling career, was the coaching part, less the performance. But and for me, it was about really going deeper, and you were aware of that when you first came to see me, and I said, well,
remember one of our lessons very vividly.
And I won't go into it, but I would say to people, I said, well, my approach is kind of like maybe what you'd call psychological, or it's about going kind of deep into your relationship with the characters, with the story, and the things that it triggers in you, really looking at why did this story come to you, and what's going on. And I was fortunate that I had a chance to work with many storytellers in Scotland. Quite a few, some briefly and some long-term, like for years. And I was very fortunate that I thought those were very courageous people, because like going into therapy, it wasn't the same as therapy. It was similar, but they were very courageous, because that's not a journey that everybody wants to take, and that's fine. Some people are more skills based. They might go almost like a theater workshop, where you learn, you focus more just on the skills like voice and movement, and all that's important. And I would try to incorporate those too where I could. But I'm still, even to this day, I always say to people, are you willing to go deep? As my friend June says, deep, dark, and delicious. And I think that's good. And it can be a scary place. Even I get scared. Even I get anxious, nervous about going there. But I know that for me, that's an important journey to take. And I know you're very much about the journey itself. And
well, just when I'm listening to you, the memories are kind of going through my head. And I remember us discussing in one of our sessions, it was one of my favorite stories, The Soldier and Death.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
going to say this now. I still haven't told it.
Well,
After all this time, I still haven't found the voice for it.
That's okay. And you're quite right to wait, because the voice will come. I believe, stories come when they feel that you're the person who they want to tell. And in the meantime, somebody else will be telling that story somewhere in the world.
Yep.
And, these stories were here long before you and I, and they'll be here long after you and I are gone.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've had stories, I've been on stage and I planned a repertoire. And then even at the last second, a story just came into my head, and I thought, and it said to me, it was like, no, Michael, that story you planned, you're not going to tell that one today. You're going to tell me. And it was like,
yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. And, I always have this thing for me. If somebody comes to a performance that I'm giving, I would much rather, and this is not a right or wrong thing, this is just me, I would much rather people remember the story long after they're gone than remember me. But there are performers, there are tellers who I know, who I've met people, and they remember the teller. And then I'll say, oh, what stories did he tell? Oh, I don't know. I can't remember, but he was really funny. And they remember him, and they remember his name or her name or whatever, And so there's some people that come across really, really strong that way, and that's great. Like it is really good. We're all different. There's no one way to be a storyteller. No one way at all.
No, that's true. Yeah.
And then there's other people. I mean, one time I was sitting at a table in a cafe up in northern Scotland there, and I had done a performance the night before. And I was sitting with some friends, and we were just chatting away. And then these two women came and sat down, and they started quite excitedly. They started telling my friends about this storytelling event they'd been to the night before. And they started telling the story that had been told. And I was sitting there right beside them. and then my friends looked over, and they said, oh, wait. They said, this is the guy that told that story that you saw, and they looked at me, and it was like, you're the guy. It's like, and I said, yeah, I am the guy. But I said, you know what? I said, and they were apologizing. They go, oh, really sorry. I said, no. I said, it really, that meant so much to me that you remembered the story, and you came in here wanting to tell my friends the story. That to me, that's an achievement.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. You don't need to remember me. If you do, that's great. But I'm, you and I, we're like vehicles for the stories. It's a real honored profession. It really is. Very old tradition. Yeah. And we're carriers. We're carriers of a tradition, and stories find us, and we have to honor them, and we have to be worthy of. I hope I'm not sounding too precious when I say this.
No,
but
this is lovely. This is reminding me why I do it.
Yeah, we need to honor the stories, and we need to be worthy of that honor. To me, it's like a sacred art. Yeah. And it's not to say I'm not serious. It's fun. It can be fun. We can be entertaining. We can jump around, be funny, but we can also, we serve the story. Everything we do is to serve the story.
Yeah. And
it can be different. It can change from week to week, year to year. You can do one story, and it can be performed in one way, but a year later you might do it, and you might find a whole different element in it, a different approach to it.
The stories evolve, I find. It's really fascinating.
Stories love that. They don't want to stay the same every time. They find different voices to tell them. Sometimes it's a woman's voice, sometimes it's a kid's voice, or an elder's voice, or a guy like me. We're all unique, and there's so many stories in the world, aren't there? I mean, there's so many stories that never going to run out. Was it Anansi the spider? He opened up that Pandora's box of stories, and he let them all out.
That was one of the first stories I ever learned, and I could never tell it properly, but I've always said I discovered very early in my career, trying to do other cultural tales doesn't necessarily work for you if you're not of that culture, because of the language, the flow, it's very interesting how it all works.
It is, and stories are amazing things. I told a story once, and I can't remember the whole story right now, but it was I think it was called like The White Bear. I learned it in Scotland in a kind of Scottish version of it, and I told it in a school in West Lothian, and the teacher had like a teacher's helper, a student, young woman in her 20s, I guess, and she came up to me afterwards, and she had an accent. I thought it was East European or something, and she said to me, "Where did you learn that story?" And I said, "Oh, here in Scotland." And she goes, "My grandmother told me that story when I was a girl." I said, "Oh, where are you from?" And she said, "Siberia." And she told the same story. And I went, "Wow," And she said, "Well, there's a few details that that are different. It's obviously been kind of made a little bit sort of like fit Scottish culture, Scottish landscape and so on."
Yeah.
But I said, "Wow, that happens all the time, doesn't it? Stories traveled. Stories didn't always stay rooted in one place. They like to travel with the merchants, with the travelers, the sailors, the fishermen, the hunters, and the women, who went out into the woods and the fields and picked berries, a long time ago, and they'd meet strangers and they go, 'Oh, do you have a story for us?' And here in this country, in Canada, the French, when they came here, the fur traders, they exchanged stories with the indigenous peoples, and they took away some of the indigenous stories, what they could remember, and the indigenous peoples also took on some of the stories, because there are many of these old stories that have references to some have the patterns from the old Grimm folk tales, those ancient tales, and also from the Bible, of course, too, the biblical tales. So there was always a real mixture of exchange of stories. And it reminds me, when I was in the Middle East back in 2009, and I was in Nazareth telling stories at a gathering of about 300 teachers. And many of the teachers brought some of their children and some of their own children. And I told this story, Silly Jack. You probably know that. It's sometimes called the Farmer and Jack, or Silly Jack. Okay. Yeah. Goes through the days of the week, and his mother gets him a job at the farm, and
Yes.
And he keeps losing his reward, and it's a kind of very silly story. And I started doing it, and I did it in English. And of course, everybody is Arabic speaking, but many people did, a lot of people did understand English, but I also had a translator and off to the side. So I would tell a bit of the story and she would translate. And then I would tell a bit of the story and she'd translate. But she was pretty tired at one point, and it was hot in the room and stuff. And I would tell part of the story, and then she would say one sentence, and it'd be like, "That's weird." It's like, I just spoke for about 2 paragraphs and she just gave one sentence, like, what's going on? So anyway, I just continued with the story. And the thing was, the kids were laughing all in the right places. And they were laughing so much, I started to ham it up, and I turned it kind of into like a slapstick, almost like Shrek or something, it's like, so I got really, I was really acting over the top, and I was all over the place, but they all laughed and reacted in the right places. I thought, that's really weird. Now the woman's not even translating for me, and yet they seem to know it. So I guess they maybe all understand English. So when it was all over, I went down, and one of the Arabic women, she came up to me and she spoke English, and she said, "Oh, that was lovely." And then her little 5-year-old came running over to me, and he just leapt up into my arms and gave me a big hug, and speaking Arabic. And she said, "Oh, he's thanking you. He really loved that story. And he wanted to know, how did I know their story, one of their stories?" And I said, "Well," "that's a Scottish story. I think that I learned it from, Duncan Williamson back in Scotland, And she goes, "Yeah, I thought that was probably right." She goes, "But we have a story very similar to that one. And the reason the kids didn't understand your English, but they understood what you were doing. They understood the story because they recognized it as one of their stories, a story that they had grown up with." And I went, "Isn't that amazing?" I said, "Wow, these stories go all over the place. There's versions everywhere." So
that is
we're just servants of stories, Calum. We just out there to serve them and do the best we can.
Yeah. So we'll wrap up soon, Michael, because I don't want to keep you too late.
Must be midnight, is it? What is it?
But it's only what, 10 o'clock, 10, 20 past 10 for you?
Yeah. I did tell you to bring a pillow, right?
Oh, no. Trust me, I could go all night listening to this. I love it. Another wee quick question. Someone's asking you, you do a lot of coaching and mentoring. So is there sometimes how do you know if someone's going to be good at performing storytelling, or shall we say good at performing or storytelling? Is there something in a person that you can always see, or can you always just bring that out of them?
That's a really good question. I think it is an intuitive thing. I mean, people have come to me at all different levels of skills. So, I mean, I've had people come, who are already storytellers, and I kind of wonder why they've come to me and want to work with me, because they're already out there telling stories, and I think they're pretty good, But and then other people come and they've never done it before. They want to maybe do it like older people want to tell stories to their grandkids, and they want to feel confident, So a lot of it is like, what's the intention? I like to get to know the person first. What's their intention? There's no right or wrong intention. I just like to know kind of the deeper bit of what brought you. What is it about stories? And I like to know what the background, like, who are the storytellers in your life? What kind of stories did you read? And what were your, did you have a special teacher that? And you often find that this is to be true. This is interesting. Many storytellers I've worked with didn't grow up in storytelling homes.
Yeah.
It kind of came later. I used to always assume, the really good storytellers, I bet, they grew up in a storytelling home. The parents told stories, the grandparents told stories, but that happens rarely, it's occasionally. Yeah. But it's not the rule. Most people, they don't grow up in homes like that. So sometimes you just get a feeling. Sometimes it's just a sense of enthusiasm. Some people have a natural kind of gift for the gab, but not everybody is. And I think what a lot of it is, like I don't know that I teach. I'm not an expert at skills and all that kind of stuff, What I do, I think, is I just say, are you like, do you want to go on a journey? Like I said, I'll go with you. If you want to like commit to it, I will kind of go by your side, but I'll be guided by you. But I can advise and, steer you a little bit, but I believe that everybody has everything they need to be a storyteller already when they come to me. Even the most, person who thinks that they're just a rank amateur, I already believe that, you just don't know it yet, but you have everything that you'll need inside. And, David Campbell, who we both, I know, really respect as a storyteller. He's, for those who don't know him, David, I think he's 80 now or 81. He is like a premier storyteller, very steeped in the tradition in Scotland.
Yeah, he's fabulous.
Yeah,
and he's not to blow his trumpet, because he doesn't need his ego blown anymore. But David is just like a gentleman. He's beautifully spoken. Yeah, he's always so caring and so David has been a very wonderful influence for me as well. I didn't have him as a mentor, but he was definitely in the guiding. He is. I always joke about the. Sorry to segue, but wee anecdote always makes me smile. I remember one of my first ever sessions in the Scottish Storytelling Cafe, doing the Wednesday night Cafe Voices, was it?
Yeah.
And I was, I think, the host, or I was just trying a story, and I'm pacing and I'm trying to tell, and I'm a bit nervous, and David's right in the front row, and I kind of take a wee pause in the story, and I hear this very faint but commanding tone, unnecessary movement.
Yeah.
And I always think so affectionately to that moment, because it's like, you old bugger you, but you were right, so I have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, he's very, very generous, in his advice and his support, and And David once said to me during one of our sessions, we went for a walk and we went to the park in Queen Street there, had a bottle of wine and some sandwiches, and we sat there. And he said, Michael, he said, I think I asked him that question, like what's the secret to becoming a storyteller? And he said, Michael, he said, you can learn, anybody can learn skills. He said, all you got to do is go out and watch other people and take what you think will work for you. Don't necessarily copy, but he said, you can imitate to begin with, and see if it fits, see if it works. But he said, you just watch people, watch comedians, watch stand-up comedians, watch actors, watch other storytellers. There's so many places where you can learn like skills. But he said, you really the skills have to come really from the inside out. So you can watch and try things, but they got to feel right and they got to feel natural, because everybody, if it doesn't feel natural, we're going to see that, And what I try to do is as a coach, is two things, is act as a mirror and as a window. And what I mean by that is I act as a mirror in the sense when I'm watching people or listening to them, I try to mirror back to them what I'm experiencing, not judging, just saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm hearing. Was that your intention? And what is the, Doug Littman used to say, always know the most important thing. What do you want the audience to kind of go away with after they've heard your story? Do you want them to laugh? Do you want them to cry? Do you want them to be educated? Do you want them to be like deep thinking? And then everything you do should be to that end. And then so every gesture, your voice, everything should be kind of brought in to achieve that. So the skills have to feel natural, and he said, but the thing that really does it are these deep conversations, which is what David and I used to have all the time.
David's very good at those. He's wonderful to converse with.
And that really kind of guided a lot of my my coaching. Was they were really about having these like really deep conversations with people about story, about your relationship with story. It's not about me like telling you how to tell a story. It's like, because I have my own way, I can do it. I mean, you're welcome to borrow anything, that I do. I don't mind that. We have a tradition where if we take somebody's story, we honor it. We say, I learned this from Calum Lykan, or I learned this from David Campbell or from Ruth Kirkpatrick or whoever. But it's these really deeper conversations. And, David was a very, very good best friends with Duncan Williamson, the late Duncan Williamson, the Scottish traveler storyteller. And he's told this funny story. And you can read all about this because David published 2 volumes biography of Duncan Williamson.
Yeah, they were great.
Very, very good. And David used to say to me, he said, I used to have these deep conversations, with Duncan about storytelling. Because David was, is an academic as well, and he worked for the BBC and so on. And one day, Duncan just laughed, just dismissed David, and said, David, he said, there's nothing to story. All there is, you just tell stories. That's it. There's nothing, all this stuff about, going to school and, learning, coaching, blah, blah, blah. You just tell stories. That's the end of it. There's nothing more to it than that. And David kind of went away crestfallen. It's like, oh, right. Well, we won't do that again. So weeks go by, and the next time David says, the next time he runs into Duncan, and David's really quiet, and they're just like, doing stuff, and then Duncan goes, David, why are you so quiet? He said, how come you don't, why can't we talk about stories? And David goes, well, I didn't think, I thought that annoyed you. Oh, no, come on, let's talk. Let's have another deep conversation about storytelling. So even David said Duncan was kind of like, back and forth, there was no one way about it,
Yeah.
Some days you feel like just do it. And other days, no, it is really important. And over the years that David knew Duncan, and you read the book, they had hundreds of conversations, deep conversations about story. And Duncan was just a great mentor to David and to many other people as well. Scotland's blessed. You know, Scotland, we've got people like Jess Wilson, or Jess Wilson, right? No,
Jess Smith.
Jess Smith. Jess Wilson, somebody else down in Wales, who is a storyteller. Yeah, we're so blessed. And Donald, I mean, Donald Smith, who co-founded with David and others the Scottish Storytelling Centre. Just give you one short example of this is Donald for you. 2011, the Scottish International Storytelling Festival takes place in mid-October. At the very end of September, almost beginning of October, we're 3.5 weeks away from the beginning of the festival. Donald comes to me and says, Michael, I was thinking you could do a performance, a show at the festival. And I was like, I thought he meant like the following year, And I'm going, yeah, I could think about it. And he goes, I said, like, you're thinking about like the following year, right? And he goes, no, this year. I'm going, well, it's 3 weeks away. He goes, well, it's 3.5 weeks away. And it's like, Donald, you want me to put out a whole show? It was like an hour and 15 minutes or something like that. I said, like a whole show, like me, like, he goes, yeah, you can do it. You could write a show. And it was like, oh, okay. So anyway, I did. And I wrote a show, and I enlisted some musicians and some other people and put it on the stage in the theater. And it was great. It worked, it worked out really well. But and in fact, the thing that Donald said, he said, I'm really glad you said yes. He said, because you're already in the program. So without even asking me, he'd put me in the program.
And that would have been followed by a bombastic laugh that
it was exactly. So that's I mean, storytelling's been a great it's been a great journey. I've met so many interesting people along the way, and it's been a real privilege that people have trusted me or entrusted their passion for story with me. And and there, to go back to the person that asked the question, I like to have that conversation first, because there are some people where we mutually agreed that I probably wouldn't be the best fit for them. And then I would recommend somebody else, usually at the Storytelling Center. I'd say, oh, you should probably work with Janice Mackay or work with, Ruth Kirkpatrick or Michael Cairns, or like one of the many, many other storytellers that are part of the directory. There are many talented people, and there's so many workshops and other people to work with. So that was an important part too, was to getting to know all the different tellers. And so I love that. Very often when I felt like I wouldn't be the right person, I could say, right, if you're really interested in street performing, you want to go talk to Calum Lykan. Oh, where will I find him? Just walk up the high street on a Friday night. It's like you'll
just
find
look
him
for the idiot flashing his thigh.
yeah. So so there's a lot of wonderful people out there, and I miss them all. I miss you guys. But I must say, I've not been sitting idle. I've discovered the Storytellers of Canada, and I found my own local storytelling group, the Burlington Guild of Storytellers, and there are a number of other guilds and groups around in Ontario, here in Toronto and Ottawa and Kitchener and Montreal, and I was on the board for a year with the Storytellers of Canada, and went to their conference in Peterborough one year, and then the next year down in New Brunswick in Fredericton. And this year it was going to be out in Nanaimo, out in British Columbia, but the COVID had to cancel that, and it was held on mostly on Zoom. So changing times, but stories will always prevail. You're seeing to that too. And Calum, I know we're getting to the end, so I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm really grateful to you.
No, this has been great, but you're not getting off that easy, Mike.
Oh, okay. You said something about...
We've still got 10 silly questions to ask you.
Right, okay.
So these are just quick fire silly ones that the audience sent in to me.
Okay. Oh, no.
So it's just a nice way to finish every interview on a little bit of a giggle, and kind of also get a psychological appraisal of the guest. Don't spit the wine. Okay. What's the worst job you've ever done?
Washing windows. I mean, but for this one particular guy who was so mean to me, and once he made me so nervous, I spilled the whole bucket of water in a convenience store, and it flooded the store, and he never let me hear the end of it. And I hated that job.
Oh, that's a brutal one. Okay, who should play you in a biopic of your life?
Johnny Depp.
Oh, I love it. Okay, your favorite kitchen utensil and why?
My favorite kitchen utensil is the garlic press, because I just for no other reason than I love garlic, but I love putting the garlic in there and then squeezing it and watching it ooze out.
You see, we had a discussion with the last guest, and we both agreed we do not like the garlic press.
Oh no, I like it. It's like little worms coming out. That's awesome. That's the kid in me. Yeah.
Oh, no,
I didn't squish worms.
Oh.
I never squished worms or put worms in a garlic press, but garlic,
please don't.
Yeah.
Please don't.
No.
How do you feel about garden gnomes?
They can I don't have any garden gnomes, but I sometimes, when I go for walks, I always say good morning to them, always, because you never know, and you know stories well enough that if you ignore a gnome or any fairy-like creature, you're just asking for trouble.
Always acknowledge the fae.
And I always say good morning to magpies and crows as well.
Yes. You know, I have done that always, and I keep forgetting where it comes from at times, and then I'm like, but every time I say a magpie or a crow, I always.
Yeah. Well, magpies, that's that from what I understand, and that's a Scottish tradition.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a traveler tradition. But Jeff Smith will probably correct me on that.
I couldn't quote it, but yes, it definitely comes from something like that. Okay, what superpower would you want, and would you use it for good or evil?
Ooh. Maybe invisibility. That I could make myself invisible and go places and listen to people, and scare. And I do have a habit of I like to kind of scare people. I'm always doing that with my brother and his girlfriend. I like to hide behind doors when I can see that they're coming in, their arms full of groceries, and then I just do that. You know, I'm very bad. I have a bad habit of doing that. So invisibility would help that passion of mine. Yeah.
So would that be for good or evil then?
Well, it'd be good for me because I always get a laugh out of it, and that makes me feel good.
Okay.
If they punch me, then that's not very nice, and then I would probably go invisible and trip them up and do something to them.
Okay. We're not getting into Michael's dark side at this time. Pineapple on a pizza, yes or no?
Oh, it's not my favorite. No, not. I mean, I'd eat if you bought the pizza and it had pineapple, I would eat it. But I normally would.
And black olives.
Oh, I used to hate olives, but I like olives now. Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't order pineapple myself, and I probably would never order anchovies. But if you ordered them, they're okay now and again. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're stuck in an elevator with one person. Who is it?
Oh, it could be what's her name? It could be anybody, right?
Yes, anyone you wish.
One person. Well, maybe Margaret Atwood. You know why? Because I had a conversation with Margaret Atwood long time ago, just by accident. I was sitting minding my own business, and she came walking along and asked if she could sit down at my table. And I said yes. And I knew who she was. She didn't know who I was, of course. And we started talking. We had this really wonderful conversation, but she got pulled away before we finished the conversation. So I would just like to be in an elevator so we could finish that conversation.
No, I like that.
Yeah. And it wasn't even about literature. It was about canoeing and the Great North and stuff like that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Why did the chicken cross the road?
Because the other chickens didn't want it on their side of the road. They exiled the poor chicken. That's why he crossed the road. Get away from them.
It for tripping them up and scaring them behind doors.
Yeah. I don't need you guys. I'm going to the other side of the road.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. What What is your musical artist guilty pleasure?
Musical artist guilty pleasure. The ukulele.
Ah, you're just going for a whole instrument. Ah.
Well, I joined. I didn't think I was going to like it, but I joined a ukulele group, and now, of course, we play on Zoom. I love the ukulele. My other guilty pleasure is the banjo.
Yeah, which is the devil's work.
Yes, and I love the banjo is my soul instrument. The ukulele is probably like my liver instrument or something.
Oh wow!
But I love the banjo, and I know people, you either love it or hate it, and my soul resonates with old-timey banjo, you know, Appalachian style banjo.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I love it. That's my guilty pleasure. Ooh,
no, that's I always joke about the banjo, but when it's played well, like for example, when
I didn't say I played it well.
Billy Connolly plays it amazingly.
Yeah,
you know, and
he does. Yeah, and Steve Martin, the comedian, is a great banjo player. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, the last silly question. You're about to get in a fight. Oh. What is the theme music that plays in your head?
What's that? Is it Wagner's the Ride of the Valkyries?
Oh, you're going full on classical.
Oh yeah. Like I'm like Loki or whatever, you know, Thor coming down from the heavens, you know, thunderbolts. Yeah, watch out.
I haven't been I've got that image in my head.
I haven't been in a lot of fights before, but the couple I have been, I can be scary if I want to be.
Nice.
But it doesn't happen very often, really.
No,
I'm quite a nice
soul.
I'm a gentle soul. Yeah.
But inside, but a seething, wrathful bear.
Well, it happens if you know somebody insulted you, like really. I mean, if it was really uncalled for. I mean, and you know, you could probably handle yourself. But if a friend of mine or a loved one of mine, if somebody threatens them, I'm like the mama bear, you know, the papa bear, grizzly bear.
Well, to be honest, my wife keeps saying I shouldn't start things that she needs to finish.
Well, at the moment, I don't have anybody that can finish anything I start, so I kind of have to. I have to kind of either I don't start something, or if I do, I got to finish it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, we're coming now to the end of our chat, which has been fabulous. The last thing I always like to ask my guests is for their Yoda words of inspiration. You obviously do a lot of coaching and mentoring, so you've probably imparted so much wisdom, but if you met somebody new coming into the craft or into performance, is there any bit of advice that you could give them? Just a bit of wisdom to inspire them or tell them to run away?
I wouldn't tell them to run away. Never. I'll probably just, what I'm going to say is probably just a cliche, but it's true. I would say, like, go for it. Just do it. You know, there's no, I mean, I've had people come thinking that there's like a curriculum, like there's a plan, there's a roadmap to becoming a storyteller. You know, if you worked with me, like we collaborate to make the roadmap. You know, I don't have any kind of pre-planned thing in my head about how it's going to go. And I said it earlier, but I believe, you know, that the very fact that you have come forward and even asked me that question, I just believe then at that point, you know, I'm looking at somebody who has all the potential. It's just my job. My job is to tease it out, to invite it, to create a safe space for that to happen, and to convince you. It's really about I'm convincing you, or raising your confidence, however, your self-esteem or whatever, to like flower. You know, I'm there to kind of nourish. I said earlier about being the window and the mirror. You know, the mirror is to mirror back what I'm seeing, so you see yourself. And the window is sometimes to reframe. Like I'll say, like, okay, you're seeing the world, you're seeing the story through that window. That's what you see. But what if I shifted it over here? Or made you sit, you know, sometimes say, go sit in that chair. Now tell me, what do you see from that angle, you know? So it's kind of getting people to like be open, be willing to see things differently. Like, don't come to me with a preconceived idea of what you're supposed to be, because the exciting thing is you might become something that you never dreamed of, but man, it's going to be amazing. You know, my whole life is like that. I never ever dreamed that I was going to, you know, that I would be this, you know, that for the last 20 years, I've somehow made a living as a storyteller, and found, you know, I found all kinds of ways of doing it, from schools to my grandkids to working in corporate. I worked in like big corporate companies and big international companies, worked with CEOs, and worked with organizations with people with chronic illness, you know, cancer, arthritis, Parkinson's, a lot with mental illness, seniors experiencing loneliness and social isolation. It's all story, you know, like you can do anything with story, like, you know, but you just got to be open and willing to enter into the world of story, you know, and I just believe in you. Like, we're all storytellers, you know, we're all, and we're all, that's what human beings are. Human beings, I don't necessarily like the analogy, but you know, there are many people say we're hardwired, and there is sort of neuroscientific, psychological, you know, evidence, you know, that we're actually wired in the head. Our neural pathways, we're wired for narrative, you know.
Yeah.
We remember stories way longer than PowerPoint presentations, you know. and you know, that's why we hear a good story and we want to tell it to somebody else. You know, I've heard you tell stories, and then it's like, oh, I wait till next time I see somebody. Oh, I saw Calum, and he told the story. You know, so that's how we are. That's what connects us with one another. And if anybody's interested, if you're interested in storytelling, wow, you're just upping your humanity. You know,
and as another point, if anyone is interested in storytelling, Michael's Facebook page is scrolling at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Please do get in touch. I can highly recommend him as a mentor or story coach.
and I also have a brand new website, which is just michaelwilliamstoryteller.com.
Excellent. Okay.
That's really simple. And you're more than welcome to just get in touch and, you know, criticize what I've said here tonight, or you might have a different view, or if you want to say something nice, that's always nice too. And if you want to,
don't annoy him too much, because he'll get in a fight and Rise of the Valkyries will come out. And...
or I might jump out from behind the door or something.
Yeah.
But no, I'm always interested, and you know, at the moment, one of the things I'm keen on is legacy work. You know, working with people, older people, about helping them put their life story together, or helping people work with their parents or grandparents to help them, to teach them how to ask questions using what you've done here tonight, Calum. The hero's journey is a great template. You know, record them, get these stories down, you know. And if it's okay just to finish with one short little thing, just to illustrate that.
Yeah.
So I worked with an elderly woman who was 89 years old. She was in the Royal Blind Home, lived in the Royal Blind Home in Edinburgh. And I had got to know her through a local church in Edinburgh. And she used to come to my storytelling workshops. And she was obviously very touched. And in fact, I remember one day she was in the storytelling center, and I was telling a story, and I can't remember what it was, but she was crying. You know, she had tears in her eyes. And I asked her afterwards I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Oh, I am. She said, "But, you know, you looked right at me when you were telling that part of the story." And she said, it saddened me, because I didn't grow up in a home where my parents never told stories. We never got told stories." And she said, "I'm 89 years old, and that was the first time that a person looked at me and telling me a fairy tale, you know." Made her feel special. Wow. So anyway, that was the kind of beginning of our friendship. And a while later, I invited her around for a cup of tea, and I went and picked her up and brought her to my flat. And the idea was I wanted to hear her story. So I decided to record it. I had a recorder, and I basically did what you did, Calum. I used the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
I spent 2 hours asking her about her life from her childhood right up until the present day.
Yeah.
It was just, and at the end, it was so moving. She'd been in South Africa during those apartheid years. She worked for the church in Soweto and other places in South Africa, and doing really good work with people. And a lot of things I didn't know about her. Anyway, when we finished, it was a real solemn moment. We were both just silent, quiet. And I was like, wow. And I turned the recorder off. 2 hours of material there, And then she kind of laughed. I said, oh, what is it? Dorothy was her name. And I said, what is it, Dorothy? And she said, well, she goes, feels good. I can go now. And I said, oh, don't worry, Dorothy. I said, I'll take you home. You don't have to get a taxi or anything. I'll drive you home. And she goes, no. She goes, I can die now. And it was like, wow. And what she meant was, this is the first time in her life she had ever told her life story. And somebody listened from beginning to end. And it was recorded. And I promised her that I would, she never married. She had no children of her own, but she had 2 nieces, adult nieces. I said, I'll make sure that they get the recording of this. Well, she died within 6 months. And I sent the recording to her nieces. And a couple of weeks later, they wrote me a lovely letter back saying how grateful they were, never thought of doing that themselves. And how grateful they were, one, because whenever they wanted, they could hear the voice of their aunt, who they loved very much and they missed. And they said the other thing was, she said, there were things in that story we had no idea. We had no idea that she had been in South Africa and done all those things. We had no idea that we knew she did something in social work. She was the head of the Berkshire, social work department. She was the head person. And all these things, there were so many details that helped them fill in gaps in the family history. But most of all, it was like a gift of love that Dorothy had left behind, and that's why she felt that she could now die. That was the last gift. Our stories, that's it,
That was beautiful.
And
Michael,
so that's the most important part of my work. That's what I would like people to remember. And I love doing it, but we can all do it. You can all do it. It's not difficult.
Yeah,
just takes patience and curiosity, just as you've shown tonight. Patience and curiosity.
I'm kind of laughing because you're saying I've done my questions on the hero journey, but because I'd mentioned it to you earlier, you literally did it yourself for me, which was fabulous. It was so nice to
doing it for a long time, that's for sure.
Yeah, you've definitely got that experience.
And just to say to your listeners and anybody, if you're listening after the fact too, just thank you for your patience and curiosity too, and thanks for the questions and your interest.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you. Well, Michael, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay.
This is actually the last show of the bulk section, the opening salvo of these shows, because you're my last Tuesday night guest.
Right.
From now on, we just go on to Thursday. So thank you for being my last guest of the opening, the word has escaped me, the opening section of this series.
Yeah, okay.
I had a big bulk kind of group, 2 a week to do, and you're kind of the last one of that section. So thank you very much for joining me. Well,
you're very welcome. All the best to you, Calum.
Excellent. I'm going to pop you back into the green room, and please do stay there, and I'll catch up with you in a moment after I've just signed off the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Williams.
Cheers. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. That was the wonderful Michael Williams, a man who's very special to me just simply because he's been now in my life for about 8 years. He's given me guidance. And even tonight, just listening to him, he's reminded me of things that I'd forgotten and just kind of also reminded me of why I try and do what I do. So that's, he keeps teaching me even when he doesn't mean to. So this has been lovely for me. I want to thank you all for joining. This is the last Tuesday evening that we'll be doing. From now on, we are Thursday nights. We're going to 1 episode a week, Thursday nights. That was always the plan, just to do a kind of big opening run to get some interviews there and get the show out there. And then Thursday nights from now on. So we'll see you this coming Thursday. Our Thursday night guest, there is a slight hiccup that may happen, and that is simply this. Ryan Adam Wells, a fabulous musician and gentleman I've met through the fringes, is a little bit poorly at the moment. I say a little bit. The messages I've been seeing, he's suffering quite badly, hurting with a very serious cough. So he may not be our guest on Thursday. I'm still waiting to see. However, I have a couple of people on standby if Ryan does need to pull out. So Thursday's episode may be a surprise guest, and one of them may even be sitting up to 2, 3 in the morning, all the way from Edinburgh, just to talk to you guys. So Thursday, this coming Thursday, which is, I need to check the date because I believe we're actually going to be in July, aren't we? Yeah. Wow. Thursday, the 2nd of July. Can you believe it? Hopefully it will be the wonderful Ryan Adam Wells. If not, it will be a surprise guest, so we'll see you all then. If anyone is interested in joining us as a guest, we've had a couple of emails already. My email is running at the bottom of the screen, calumlykanstoryteller@gmail.com. If you're interested in joining me, please drop me an email and we will get you on the show. But also do remember, we have set up our Patreon page. Patreon is this facility which allows you to become a patron of this show. It allows you to donate and support the show, and by doing that I can upgrade equipment, a studio, but more importantly, one of the things I'd really like to do is give my guests a little something. At the moment, they're giving me an hour, 2 hours of their time, and I would just like to be able to give them a gift back, just to say thank you for investing in the show themselves, and I want to return that back to them as a little gesture. So have a look at our Patreon page. It's simply A Scotsman Talks To on Patreon, and you can join us and sign up. But do join us on Thursday. Ryan Adam Wells, hopefully, if not, a surprise guest, and we will see you all on the next episode of A Scotsman Talks To. Thank you for joining. Much love and have a great night.